Today's scripture reading will be taken from Matthew 1:18 through 25. Matthew 1:18 through 25. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with the child of the Holy Spirit. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. But while he thought about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. Then Joseph, being arose from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded, and took to him his wife, and did not know her till she had brought forth her firstborn son, and his name was Jesus.
Good morning. As Darren pointed out, I've got a great crowd here this morning, so greatly appreciate you being with us. And if you didn't know any better, you'd think this is a lesson about the birth of Jesus, which I would dare say is probably the lesson that's being taught. In fact, a lot of churches would probably have a little bit of a theater and actually act out the whole scene. And so it's a little bit about that, but it's a lot more than that, you'll find as we go through the lesson. And I hope you get a lot out of this. And certainly I've always, in family gatherings, we associate with a lot of family that celebrates this time of year as the birth of Jesus, and many people do. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and certainly talk a little bit more about that. And maybe it's a good opportunity, because the birth of Jesus is a very small part, an important part, and we'll notice the birth of Jesus was significant, and there's things that we learn from it. There's a lot of good things that happen this time of year, and I hope that I think this lesson's kind of upbeat. I like upbeat sermons. But this is generally a happy time of the year, is it not? Time with family, friends, and loved ones. It's just so awesome to have family in, and you need excuses, right? Sometimes to get family to come together, and that's always nice. A lot of folks, it's a sad time of the year as well. It's a time when, especially if you've lost a loved one that's close, it's just not the same. And sometimes you have a loved one that's like the central point. They're always the one that had the parties. They're always the one that was kind of like the glue that kept the family together. And I've seen literally the holidays totally ruined for families when that person is gone. Again, missing folks that are near and dear to us. And there's many are critical, certainly of the Christian faith, of how commercial everything has got. And really is. It's really commercialized. You're seeing more and more Christianity and Christ being de-emphasized in our society. And I agree. I see that as well, right? It's all about money, and you go to places, the Black Friday deals, and then Cyber Monday, and there's just a lot of these things. It's all really about trying to get money from us. But it's really hard to not enjoy seeing little kids unwrap presents. You kind of lose that when kids grow up, and not to say isn't nice to give one another gifts, but certainly see a small child opening up a present and just see their eyes light up. Liam's a little bit, he understands that he can unwrap, but Emmy's 2, and she's a little bit older, and she understands the concept a little bit more, and she gets so excited. But it's just it was so fun watching them unwrap some presents. So just a happy time of the year, decorations, pretty lights around. And you can take, it amazes me, an old house sometimes. People decorate that house, and you know what, at night, it looks really good, right? People spend a lot of time and effort in doing that. And again, a time to share. It is great in this season. There is more of a spirit of sharing with one another, and that's just awesome. We have a yearly thing we do called the Gift from the Heart, and I actually really like it. It's really, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, especially if you're going there to try to win a good prize. It's really not the part party for that. It's really about making something, right? And then sharing that, and because it really is about the heart. And so it's nice we do that once a year. And believe it or not, we got obviously a lot more people here today. 64%, roughly 60% of your go nationwide. More people attend services around this time of year. 60% more people, which is kind of an awesome time. But it's also a really good time to talk to people that normally don't show up. And so when we look at the lesson today, I really want to talk about Jesus is the reason for the season, but I changed that a little bit. You paid close attention to the bulletin article. The question I ask is, what does Jesus want us to remember? You know, we obviously choose, and many folks today choose to celebrate December 25th as Christ's birthday. But I'm here to talk today a little bit about and say Jesus is the reason for the seasons with an S. And that's really the most important thing that I think folks could get people in to see these, to celebrate Christ's birth. But the most important part is not just this season. It's all year long. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in today's lesson. You know, talk a little bit of history. So the origin of Christmas actually goes back, and it's a debated point by a lot of people. But in ancient Rome, December 25th was a celebration of the unconquered sun, making the return of longer days. It says it was followed by Saturnalia, a festival where people feasted and exchanged gifts. The church in Rome began celebrating Christmas on December 25th in the 4th century, during the reign of Constantine, the first Christian emperor, possibly to weaken pagan traditions. And actually, if you study it, it really didn't become that popular until about the 8th century in the church, where they actually started more formally. But during that time is winter solstice. And winter solstice is like, if you don't know, it's the shortest day of the year, right? And back in the northern, where most of the pagan religions were up in the northern part of Europe. And so it's very short. They were all farmers. I mean, almost every single person back then were farmers. And in the wintertime, you can't grow crops. There's not much daylight. So that was a time when normally they slaughtered a lot of animals and they spent a lot of time celebrating. And that was also the point when the days started getting longer. So it was like a big point there in the beginning of December. And so when Constantine, the first Roman emperor who really embraced Christianity, saw this, he's like, we need to create a holiday, because people love the holiday. They love this winter solstice, all the partying and all the fun that was happening. And so we just need to convert this, do something around Christianity so people don't lose out on that. So that's how Christmas got started, by the way, in case you didn't know that. In fact, a lot of stuff that we do, you have no idea where it came from. It came from pagan things that they were doing. The gift giving was even something that they did. The image of Santa Claus, the actual image of what he looks like, was based off a pagan god. Christmas stockings that get hung, Christmas caroling, decking the halls with holly and decorating trees. Those were all had the genesis of those. And again, it's a debated point, but most of those clearly had connections at least to things that were done around this time of year. But you know, there is some really important things. It's so easily to say, you know, we're here to represent and remember Christ's death. But there's some important things about his birth that we as Christians should be thankful for and think about. One is that he was born of a virgin. That was prophesied. And for lack of time, I'm not going to look at all the verses, but in the Bible there, it talks about him being born a virgin. And that was all prophecy. And we see that was prophesied back in Isaiah 7:14. And we can see that actually when Jesus was born, Mary was a virgin when Jesus was born. Also, that he'd be born in the city of Bethlehem. There in Micah chapter 5 and verse 2, that was prophesied that he'd be born from Bethlehem. And then that was fulfilled. We see that in Matthew 2:4-6. Also, he's called out of Egypt. You may remember he fled because of the children that were being killed, and then they went down into Egypt. That was all prophesied back in Hosea 11:1. And Matthew 2:15, we see that they did come out of Egypt. And so we learn from this, important things that we learn from the birth of Jesus, the prophecies and them being fulfilled, that you know what? God keeps his promises. When God tells you something and promises you something, he keeps it. It was God's plan from the day man fell that he was going to send his son. And he sent prophecies and prophesied about things that would be signs of when he came. And you know what? That's exactly what happened. We see that in Luke 1 and 37. Matthew 12, 22, 23 says, before Mary and Joseph came together. 1:18 says, and Joseph knew her not until Jesus was born there in 1:25. So we see things about Jesus' birth that help us understand that God keeps his promises to us. But one of the things we need to keep in mind, and we should take advantage, because people are more receptive to Jesus during this time. I mean, people, we come together and celebrate the birth of Jesus, but it's also important that we teach them, because just celebrating his birth is not going to be enough. There's more needed. In fact, we're going to notice the most important part about Jesus and him on the earth is we need to follow him. We need to follow Jesus, follow his footsteps. It says we became great, but we become great by walking in his footsteps. That's how we become great. And also we become great by serving others as Jesus did. And this is an important factor that I think we need to be like servants, right? In verse 25 there, we read, Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. Verse 6 says, it is not so among you, but whosoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And so the lesson that we really need to share with others, and you talk about the spirit of giving, is that we need to be servants. We need to be like servants. There's a story about a school teacher. So she asked her first graders to draw a picture of something that they were thankful for. That she did not think these little children from poor neighborhoods actually had much to be thankful for, but she thought that most of them would draw pictures of turkeys on tables of food. The teacher was taken back with a picture of one little boy named Douglas, who handed her a simple, childishly drawn hand. But whose hand was the question mark? The class was captivated by the abstract image. One child said, I think it must be the hand of God who brings us food. Another said a farmer because he grows the turkeys. Finally, when the others were back at work, the teacher bent over to Douglas's desk and asked whose hand it was. The boy answered, it is your hand, teacher. She recalled that frequently at recess, she had taken Douglas, a scrubby, deserted child, by the hand. She often did that with children, but it meant so much to Douglas. Out of all the things he could have been thankful for, he was most thankful for his teacher's hand. Perhaps from this story, we can learn a valuable lesson. We learned that one most important thing that we can give someone is a hand that reaches out to them with the love of Christ. And it's so true. We really need to think about how can we serve others during this time. Obviously, all times of the year, but even particularly this time when people maybe be more receptive to the truth. So we think about following Jesus and some examples that we see when you think about being a servant. It's one thing to say to be a servant. What does it actually mean to be a servant? First of all, it's not the place of a servant to rule or question the master. So many times we think about a servant is by how, on my terms, right? The way I want to do. If I'm going to help you, it needs to be on my terms. But that's not what you see when you think about the role of a servant. It's not the place for a servant to do his own will, but the servant to completely obey the master. In John 5 and verse 30 says, I can of myself do nothing as I hear, I judge. And my judgment is righteous because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. So we think about being servant to God. It's not for us to question the master, but simply do what he says. He taught we are to completely obey. Luke 6 and 46 says, but why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? And so we can't be a servant to God and question him and not be obedient to them. John 15:14 says, you are my friends if you do whatever I command you. So when we think about the role of a servant that we take on, we need to truly be a servant for God. We need to do exactly what he says. And then finally there you can see Jesus and Mary when they attended the wedding feast. I mean, Jesus' first parable there, he says, Mary once spoke these words in reference to her son, to the servants at the wedding feast in John 2:5. His mother servant said to the servants, whatever he says, you do it. And so it's important when we think about this time of year and any time of the year that we simply, whatever Jesus teaches us, and we are his servants, that we do what he says. We must completely obey the Lord, and we must obey him from the heart, not out of guilt, but rather out of love that we have for him. You know, Jesus often acted to serve other people without being asked. You know, this is most of the time when we want to do something for someone else, we wait till they ask us, right? And so I remember sometimes, you may remember, how's come I got to ask you to clean your room up every single time? You ever think about just cleaning your room up on your own? Why do I have to ask you? You know, do you ever think about helping me out? Maybe doing dishes or clean the table off? Why do I have to ask you to do everything? Jesus did many things without being asked. Remember the widow's son there in Luke 17:11-17? He wasn't asked. He simply did it. Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Remember there, and talks about that in John 13. And he had his disciples come up and he washed all their feet. Perfect example of humility. They didn't ask him, right? That'd be the last thing his disciples would think to ask Jesus, to wash their feet. But he obviously did that to teach a valuable lesson. You know, we have many great servants in the church who jump up when something's needed. And I'm so thankful for that. I remember anybody that's ever had announcements or you're assigned that something needed to get done. It's funny how you pick the same people all the time. You know why? Because they are true servants. Anytime you ask them to do something, they'll do it. And then I may ask this person once and they say, well, I'm kind of busy. I don't feel up to it today. And you do that 2 or 3 times. Eventually it's like, stop asking them. But we're true servants. We really need to have a heart that says, what do you want me to do? I'll do whatever it is. You know, when Cassie was getting married to Brian, and we went through this dance practice thing. I'm not a dancer, by the way. I'm the worst dancer in the world. But this father-daughter dance, okay, I got to do this thing with her. And we were practicing the steps and all that. And then I said, listen, Cassie, this day is your day. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. I'm glad she didn't ask me to put a clown outfit or something like that on, because that would have been a hard one. But then she said, well, I want you to marry us. I'm like, okay, I can do that. It was a little bit of a workout to the state of Ohio to get that license. But when you have a servant's heart, when you have a heart that just, hey, whatever, and we have that, right? A lot of times to our kids, but for some reason, we don't have that heart when we need to, like with God, when God asks to do things. And so we learn a lot from Jesus about how to serve others. And there's a lot of people in this congregation that I am so thankful for. Really people that want to work, people that want to do things. Somebody needed a ride to services. Somebody needs some money or a helping hand. I know I could call on almost anyone in the congregation if I needed something and they would help me out. And that's a good feeling to know that. Somebody who's sick, you know, there's nothing worse than sitting with someone that's sick. If you got a busy schedule or somebody's sick, not feeling well, it's such a blessing to have someone there with you, right? And there's a lot of ladies that do that here, and I'm so thankful for them. And then how many times somebody's sick and said, hey, we just want to thank all the people who brought food. You know, I'm not very good in that category, but there was a lot of ladies in this congregation who are so good about helping others that when they're sick and taking them food. Especially if you got a mother or it's taking care of children, and nothing worse than being sick and then having to take care of others, right? That's such a difficult thing to deal with, but people step up and they do that. Taking attendance, clean the building, take care of the baptistry, furnace, all that. You know, there's people doing that. You may not know that. A lot of those people don't get called out. They don't get recognition, but there's people doing that and they don't complain about it. Preparing communion. That's always prepared, right? We come here on the Lord's Day. Somebody had to bake that bread. Somebody had to prepare all that. That's the idea of serving. greeting visitors. It's so easy just to be in your own little world when services are over and just talk with your family, but there's a lot of people here. And making it a point to go out and be friendly and greet our visitors is, again, a lot of things that I'm very thankful for. Teaching classes, this is again, a labor of love, I'll call it. I actually enjoy teaching the older kids. You put me in with some of those little kids and it's not so fun for me. It happened to me one time at Park Road and it was the worst experience of my life. And I'll just call him Jeffrey. That wasn't his name, but I'll just call him Jeffrey. And he just ran around the circle the whole time. And I yelled at him. I did everything possible to try to convince him to sit down in that chair so I could teach him. He would not the whole time. I was so thankful when the hour was over. But you know what? There's ladies that do that and people that teach classes and you can count on them. They're going to be listed on the roster. And by the way, this is a shout out too. There's an opportunity coming up. Elders and deacons met and we're going to have send out a roster for people. If you're interested in teaching, we'd love to have people step up and do that. Fill in the men's roster. Again, it'd be hard to count all the things that people do here at West Main. And I'm so thankful for that. But you know what? Doing good works is exactly what Jesus asked us to do. He calls on us to be servants, right? Not to serve ourselves, but to serve others. So, during this holiday season, people know that the idea of giving is embedded in the story of Jesus. God given his son, Jesus given us his life for mankind. And I don't think we really fully comprehend the level of humility and giving that Jesus taught. That of a servant. Live a life to serve others. You don't mind, you may have to share. They have these blue books. There's a song I love. I sing it a lot, but it just, to me, fits the lesson really well. It's number 97 in the blue book. Actually, I did get Wesley put that up there. It's going to be up here as well. I'll let you run the slides, Wesley. It's called Make Me a Servant. Do, so, mi, do, re, mi, fa, do, re, mi. Make me a servant, just like your son. For he was a servant. Please make me one. Make me a servant. Do what you must do to make me a servant. Make me like you. Make me a servant. Take all my pride, for I would be lowly, humble inside, giving to others with all that I do, in love for my brother. Make me like you. Make me a servant filled by your might, and may all my labors shine with your light. Show me your footsteps and what I should do, for now and forever. Make me like you. And so many times we focus this time of year around the birth of Jesus, but it's really the life of Jesus that we need to be thinking about. And again, a convenient time when people are thinking about Jesus. When you look at the life of Jesus, the teachings that he taught, and then ultimately the crucifixion on the cross, Jesus had a lot to teach and to tell others. In fact, that map, you can't see it. I know it's kind of an eye chart, but it talks about all the teachings, the places he went, the sermons that he taught. And the most important part is that we understand what Jesus taught us. It amazes me that folks will like to come and celebrate his birth, but they have no interest in what he says. You have any idea? It absolutely, the birth of Jesus was the greatest thing that happened to mankind. But the most important part was, this is my beloved God in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. God said, listen to what he has to say. That's the important part. What did Jesus have to say? And so that's the important thing we need to focus on. What were the lessons of Jesus? It was what he lived during and what he said during his lifetime that's so important. So yes, we celebrate his birth, but we also need, most importantly, understand what he taught. And a simple example, and again, there's so much I could talk about. I chose just the Sermon on the Mount, 8 simple things he talked about there on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know, it's so easy to be haughty and prideful. It's so easy to have that sin, and we've actually heard lessons about pride. But those that are poor in spirit, humble in heart, that's what we need to strive for as Christians. And so we need to have that in our hearts. We need to serve God with a humble heart. Blessed is they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Again, it's such a blessing to know when we lose loved ones, when we are sick and ailing, or a loved one is sick and ailing, we know there's a much greater place than this life. So much focus in today's world is on this life and on this earth. But for those that love God and those that put their faith in Jesus, we can be comforted to know there's a far better place for us. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Again, some along the line of humility there. So many times we look at meekness and say that's a weakness to be meek. But I would tell you some of the strongest people in the world are those who have a meek and calm spirit. Because their strength comes in God, not in being boisterous and not in being, I'll say, arrogant and high and mighty, but rather a meek and humble heart. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness. We talked about this in class, about how could a loving God do all these other things? It's because he's a righteous God. He has no association with darkness. And we need to have a heart that wants to do the right thing. And so Jesus said, you need to do the right thing. We need to hunger and thirst. When you think about when you're hungry and thirsty, that's all you can think about is getting food or getting water. That's the appetite we need to have for righteousness, doing the right thing. We need to have that kind of, to be filled with that kind of a heart and desire. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Those that have compassion. And again, it's a good time of the year, right? When we talk about being merciful to those that don't have, those that don't want. So many times it's hard to teach children that it's not about giving, it's about being merciful to others, being sharing and giving to others. Jesus said, blessed are the merciful. Blessed are they in pure in heart, for they shall see God. Having a heart that's pure, wanting to, again, that's that knowing what the righteousness is, and then having a heart that truly desires that and follows after that. And it's shameful, it's sad, and when you have folks who may come into services and then they go out in the world and they do all kinds of evil, live in darkness, they lie, they cheat, they are just doing bad things to others. But we need to be pure in heart. Blessed are they the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. You know, we don't have enough peacemakers in the world today. It's real easy in the work life, in the family, people like to fight, right? People like to argue. People like to, and Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Again, what a wonderful thing when we seek righteousness and we stand up for the truth, because we know that heaven awaits us. Again, we could go into many. This is just one example of things he taught. The important point I want you to understand is the heart that we need to have, and what needs to get taught is, what did Jesus teach? What does Jesus want us to do? That's the heart we need to have. Again, let's celebrate his birth. I have no issues with celebrating his birth, but use it as a time to get people to desire and understand, what did he teach? What do I need to be doing? That's the most important part. An example in John 8 there, when they caught the woman in adultery, Jesus taught the lesson. What did he say there? Let him who's without sin cast the first stone. It's so easy to cast stones. And one of the important parts that Jesus taught here is that we're all sinners, right? They were around there. They caught this woman in adultery. And it says, starting with the oldest, they departed one by one, because we all know that we all have sinned, right? That's the heart we need to have, is a forgiving heart, and not be obviously directing hate and seek punishment for those that might wrong us. And again, I asked the question, what did Jesus say? Again, like I said, let's celebrate his birth. I think it was great when he came to the earth, but it's also important to understand, what did Jesus say about that? Really, it talks about his birth twice in the Bible, but nowhere does Jesus talk about remembering, observing his birth. This is what he says. What did he say there? This do in remembrance of me. And so the important part, and we think about, we need to look at the whole life of Jesus. Again, celebrate his birth, great. More importantly, understand his teachings, and we've got to remember his death. That's what he taught us. The Lord's Supper was instituted there in Matthew 26, Luke 22. Jesus, remember, he had the Lord's Supper. Famous painting there, I think it's Michelangelo, painted this famous painting of the Lord's Supper. And he had a supper there with his disciples. And he took of the bread and he took of the fruit of the vine. He said, this do in remembrance of me. And that's why we do it, because that's what Jesus taught. And the apostles did it just as he commanded there in Acts 2:42, 1 Corinthians 11:23 and 26. They did exactly what he asked them to do. And that was to observe his death. The Lord said it was observed on the first day of the week on Acts 20 and 7. Some disciples came together there to break bread. And so they did it on the first day of the week, and which is why we do it today and not just any time. And again, two items that were used, the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine. That's why we use those things, because that's what Jesus did when he instituted the Lord's Supper. And so I just bring this up, and as when we look at what we do as Christians, is always ask ourselves, what does Jesus say? What do we need to remember? And again, I think it's great. If it's a great time of the year to enforce Christ. The birth of Jesus was fantastic, and there's a lot we can learn from that. God keeps his promises. A lot of prophecies foretold about Jesus' birth that were fulfilled. And more importantly, the life that he lived and the things that he taught. Those are things that people need to understand. And if you're here in the audience and maybe you come to services during maybe Christmas and Easter, I don't know. Let me encourage you and to dig in and try to understand, what did Jesus actually teach? Yeah, it was great he came to the earth, but what did he actually teach? What does he want me to do? That's the important question I want you to think about today. What does he want me to do? That's the heart we need to have. So use this time of year to share his birth, his life, and more importantly, his death on the cross. That was such the really think about it. If he'd have been born and lived and then didn't obey the Father and wasn't crucified on the cross, we wouldn't have any hope, would we? But he carried out that. He endured the cross, the torment, the persecution that he endured for you and I. That is the story of Jesus. You think about the gospel, this gospel is really, it's just the whole story of Jesus, his birth, his teachings, and in his death on the cross. That's the thing that I really want to drive home this morning. That is that we need to celebrate Jesus. Not just this season, but all seasons. It can be a celebration. You know how good we feel during this time of the year? We can feel that great every day of the year. You can have that high, that emotional feeling, that idea of giving and servant's heart. You can have that all year long. And that's what I hope you do. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. Only through Jesus. But you know what? That judgment day is going to come. And even though you know Jesus, you know who he is, it's only going to matter whether you put your faith in him and you believed in him. If you believe in Jesus today, make a commitment in your heart that I want to serve him and give my life to him. Repent of your sins, make the great confession. I believe Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and then get baptized. We actually had 2 baptisms in the last couple of weeks. I probably stole Darren's announcement. I save it later, but it's awesome. when people commit their life to God and say, you know what, I'm giving my life to God. I want to serve him. And you know what? It'll be Christmas every single day of the year. We can celebrate him every single day. We need to do that. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation, we can assist. Please come while we stand, while we sing.